Senate committee members considering New Jersey and Ray Donovan's nomination as Labor Secretary in the Reagan cabinet have postponed their vote. They want allegations concerning Donovan's business dealings thoroughly investigated. Mark TRANK has details.
Ray Donovan's confirmation as Secretary of Labor is no longer certain. The Senate Committee on Labor and Human Resources was scheduled to meet today and vote on Donovan. But because a committee probe into Donovan's business dealings is not completed yet, no vote has been taken. Committee Chairman Orrin Hatch of Utah is reportedly still concerned about two allegations involving Donovan: that his firm, the Schiavone Construction Company of Secaucus, New Jersey, was tied to a payoff scheme with organized crime in 1967, and that Schiavone recently hired an employee because of pressure by the Teamsters Union. Donovan told the committee on Monday he learned of the employee situation just 2 days before the hearing. At this point, it is unlikely that Ray Donovan will be confirmed as Labor Secretary before the weekend. And with some serious questions about Donovan remaining unresolved, come Tuesday, when Ronald Reagan takes office as president, there's a strong chance that Ray Donovan will still be a private citizen. In Washington, I'm Mark TRANK for the New Jersey Nightly News.
New Jersey Nightly News has learned that Senate hearings on Ray Donovan's nomination as Labor Secretary may be reopened. Senate sources say new allegations against Donovan are being investigated by the FBI. Mark TRANK reports.
Senate sources say that Ray Donovan's chances of being confirmed as Secretary of Labor seem to be diminishing. These sources state flatly that Donovan's confirmation has its problems, and that there is now enough new evidence to warrant not only a new FBI investigation, but also a reopening of the hearings to determine Donovan's suitability. The Senate committee is investigating new allegations that an individual, currently under protection by the FBI, claims to have received payoffs from Donovan over a 2-year period, from 1967 to 1969. The payments were allegedly paid to guarantee labor peace for Donovan's firm, Schiavone Construction. Because of the seriousness of the charges, Senate sources say any doubts Committee Chairman Orrin Hatch of Utah has about reopening the hearings are rapidly diminishing. The Justice Department, which relayed the information to the committee in the first place, declined to comment on the new twist of fate for Donovan, as has the FBI. But there is now a concerted effort underway by the committee to undertake an exhaustive probe into these new but as yet unsubstantiated allegations. Committee sources say that if the hearings are necessary, they'll take place after the inauguration, sometime later next week. In Washington, I'm Mark TRANK for the New Jersey Nightly News. All 9 Republicans on the committee voted to confirm Donovan, and they were joined by 2 Democrats, New Jersey Senator Harrison Williams and Jennings Randolph of West Virginia. The remaining Democrats voted present, citing their concerns about Donovan's alleged ties to organized crime. Senator Edward Kennedy of Massachusetts voiced his concern that Donovan's alleged past may hamper his future.
One of the important responsibilities of a Secretary of Labor is to fulfill the statutes on the books which deal with the types of allegations and charges which have been made about this particular nominee, dealing with labor racketeering.
Senator Howard Metzenbaum of Ohio echoed Ted Kennedy's thoughts.
In this case, we're dealing with a situation where there have been some very strong accusations that have been made. They border on, or they don't border on, they involve criminality.
A new allegation surfaced today from an FBI informer that Schiavone Construction donated building materials free of charge to Tony Provenzano in the late 60s. But the most serious allegation comes from Ralph Picardo, an ex-convict and an FBI informer, who says he personally received payoffs from Donovan in the late 60s. Donovan has heatedly denied this charge, and at a Senate hearing on Tuesday attacked Picardo's credibility.
Picardo is lying. I know he's lying. In fact, I believe he's a pathological liar. That may be one suggested answer to you, Senator. Maybe he doesn't even know he's lying. In past cases where he has testified, there are witnesses, I'm assured by my attorney, who call him a wacko, off the wall, full of shit, okay? And pathological liar.
Raymond Donovan's confirmation has apparently won approval. Senate Democrats are still jockeying to oppose his nomination, and now they have the chance to prepare a full minority report on Donovan. On Tuesday, the full Senate will finally take up the confirmation, where, barring any last-minute complications, Raymond Donovan will be confirmed. I'm Mark TRANK, New Jersey Nightly News, Washington.
Hundreds of New Jerseyans in Washington for the inauguration of Ronald Reagan may find that celebrated expanded if the hostages are released. The only thing tempering their enthusiasm is the snag Ray Donovan has hit in his attempt to be confirmed as Labor Secretary. Don Torrance is in Washington with that and other inaugural news.
Outside, Washington is deceptively serene and distracted by the anticipation of the moment the hostages come home. But inside the Shoreham Hotel ballroom last night and early this morning, Labor Secretary-designate Raymond Donovan was fighting mad. Mad, he told the hundreds of New Jersey delegates attending this ball over the treatment he's gotten on Capitol Hill.
I am proud to serve this country, but prouder, believe me, that I am from the great state of New Jersey that's been maligned so long, and we will not allow it to happen again.
Mad, he told us in an exclusive interview. So mad he won't give up the fight to be confirmed and to refute charges. He paid off Teamsters for union peace at his New Jersey construction company. And confident the FBI investigation will back him up.
I resent it. I resent it for my family, and I resent it for the state of New Jersey, which is also involved in this general attitude that any contractor coming from the state of New Jersey has to be a bad man. Am I a quitter? I wouldn't have accepted this job if I was. I believe in a quote from Jeremiah, okay? If you tire running with the footmen, you'll never run with the horses.
At his news conference today, President Reagan said he still has faith in his Labor Secretary, Ray Donovan, and added Donovan had reassured him that he had done nothing wrong. Reagan also said Donovan will stay on the job during an investigation of kickback allegations against him. The probe centers around Donovan's New Jersey construction company and charges the company paid off labor unions to avoid strikes. The Washington Post reports a former secretary for New York Union Local confirms allegations that Donovan's Chevron construction company kept phantom employees on its payroll and labor officials cashed those payroll checks. But Joyce Cole said she didn't know if Donovan was aware of the scheme. Kent?
A special investigation of U.S. Labor Secretary Ray Donovan has found no evidence that he witnessed a 1977 bribe to union officials. Former Secretary-Treasurer of Labor's Union Local 29, Mario Monturo, has accused Secretary Donovan of being present at a Long Island restaurant 5 years ago during an alleged bribe of a union local president. Donovan, who was then an executive of Chevron Construction Company of SECAUCUS, is scheduled to testify before a grand jury next month. Donovan denies any wrongdoing in the case, and he has called Monturo a liar. Chevron executives said to have accompanied Donovan to the meeting at the Long Island restaurant have also denied the allegations. Meanwhile, Mario Monturo came into some good fortune today. He won $2.5 million in the New York State Lottery. Monturo says he plans to use part of his winnings to set up a trust fund for union dissidents. Don?
For 4 months now, Labor Secretary Raymond Donovan has been under investigation by a special prosecutor. The allegation that before joining the Reagan administration, Donovan took part in an illegal payoff involving his New Jersey construction company. Soon, Donovan is scheduled to be questioned before a federal grand jury assigned to this case. Economics correspondent Irving R. Levine reports.
It's been rough going for Labor Secretary Donovan ever since his confirmation hearings.
A wacko, off the wall, full of okay, and pathological liar.
Donovan was referring to an FBI informer who claimed that Donovan's firm had mob connections. Once confirmed, Donovan got off on the wrong foot with organized labor. Visiting an AFL-CIO meeting, Donovan mistook ordinary cordiality for support of the Reagan program among union leaders.
Many stood up and said, give the president a chance at bat.
AFL-CIO President Lane Kirkland quickly caught Donovan off base.
Did, in fact, any of the members of the council stand up and or declare that the president's program should be given a chance?
Not while I was there, and I didn't leave the room.
Donovan has been plagued by missteps. In a letter to a congressional committee, he referred to an 8% unemployment rate as traditional.
What in the name of God is traditional about an 8% unemployment figure?
Later, Donovan informed the committee it was a mistake, a typo. He meant 8% unemployment was transitional, not traditional. Donovan attributes his gaffes to inexperience. He tells of a newly appointed commissioner of weights and measures who was asked by a reporter, "How many ounces are in a pound?" The commissioner's reply,
He said, "Hey, get off my back. I just got the job."
Labor leaders say they are on Donovan's back because he doesn't fight hard enough against Reagan policies that hurt workers. Yet Donovan insists his sympathies are with workers because he was born poor and had to go to work at an early age.
Shoeshine box, in fact, it's over there in the corner as a reminder of where I'd come from.
None of this impresses his union critics.
His public statements claim that he's a friend of the working man, but I believe his actions belie it.
Whatever labor's complaints, Donovan is doing what the president wants him to do, whittle away at federal job programs and health and safety regulations. And Donovan is 100% loyal.
Ronald Reagan wants me, and I believe it's the will of God that I serve here.
But doubts arose on how much longer President Reagan will want Donovan when an experienced labor expert was named as Donovan's understudy.
I'm Malcolm R. Lovell, Jr.
Malcolm Lovell is seen as standing in the wings in case Donovan has to be dropped. Whether or not Donovan can remain as labor secretary may finally be determined by the grand jury that is examining allegations against him. Irving R. Levine, NBC News, Washington.
The special prosecutor in the probe of Labor Secretary Raymond Donovan does not believe a witness in the case was murdered because he was involved in tape-recording telephone conversations for the government. The witness, Nathan Maselli, was murdered last week in what authorities are calling a gangland-style execution. Maselli allowed FBI agents to record 4 telephone conversations with a lawyer at the Schiavone Construction Company of SECAUCUS. Secretary Donovan was an officer of the company before becoming Secretary of Labor. Today, Special Prosecutor Leon Silverman said Maselli was not forced to contribute to the information, and he did not produce any changes. Earlier today, correspondent Michael Aaron got some insights into the latest Donovan-related charges.
My guest today is Ed Barnes, an investigative reporter, a friend of mine, and a person more knowledgeable on the subject of organized crime than any reporter I've ever known. He's been close to the Donovan investigation since it began. In fact, he was one of the people who helped get the investigation started, and he testified before the Donovan grand jury. Ed, quickly, what was your role in getting the Donovan investigation going?
Well, for a year, I was asked to and agreed to work for the State Commission of Investigation in New York. During that time, I received the allegation of the payoff. When I saw we were unable to do anything with it, I reported to the Senate Labor Committee.
This is Mario Montoro's allegation that Donovan was present when a payoff was made.
That's right.
The question on everybody's minds at the moment is whether any of these recent murders, particularly the murder of Nat Maselli, has anything to do with the investigation. What do you think?
I don't think anybody's going to know. The way things are right now, I think it's impossible to tell. There's certainly the circumstantial evidence there, and the coincidence. But the way the investigation has gone and the way it's going, I don't think anyone's going to be able to have a definite answer to that.
No, we're never going to know. There was the Farino murder in June, Maselli now, 2 other Genovese crime people in Brooklyn also recently. You don't think we'll know that answer?
I truly doubt it.
You don't have a gut feeling?
I think that there's certainly coincidence there, but that's as far as I think anybody can really say with any certainty.
Wouldn't it be awfully clumsy if it were somebody trying to bump off? I mean, does the mob operate in this clumsy a fashion?
Yes.
Could it be somebody out to make Donovan look bad, or Schiavone look bad, by making it look as if maybe Schiavone is bumping off witnesses?
I truly doubt anybody is either going to go to that effort to make him look bad. I think the investigation, the report has made him look bad enough. I don't know why anybody would go much further than that.
You say you think the report has made him look bad enough, and yet the special prosecutor exonerated him essentially after releasing that report. the heart of the matter is Ray Donovan tied to the mob? What's the answer to that question?
Answer to that question is somebody still ought to do some work on it. The prosecutor's report raised a number of questions. For example, the day after, shortly after the news of the investigation was underway, was made public, an executive from Schiavone asked the people at Prudenti's restaurant to destroy their records, and they did. There was never any follow-up on that part. No one asked why. Why does a guy destroy the records as soon as they find out they're investigating them? What was held in those? That was Schiavone's house account.
The special prosecutor interviewed dozens of people who worked at Prudenti's. He didn't look into that allegation?
There was a footnote on page 149 of his report, and that was as far as it went. The questions that still remain there, to me, certainly are worth continuing to ask.
So if I asked you whether Ray Donovan perjured himself before the U.S. Senate, your answer would be that you don't really know. Is that correct?
I think that's the job of the special prosecutor, and I think that job still has to be carried out.
You were critical of the way the special prosecutor has conducted his investigation, weren't you? When the report came out and in conversations you and I had recently, what's wrong with his investigation?
First of all, I think the limits that he set for himself are just too narrow. What he's done is said, all I can do is deal with Mr. Donovan. That's what he says, that's how he reads the law, and that's his choice. But also to deal with the allegations that have arisen. What you have to do is deal with the whole question of corruption in New York. Schiavone is one of the biggest companies. How bad is it? The New York Times says it's epidemic stages. I think anybody else you wanted to talk to in the industry would say corruption in New York today is as worse, is as bad as it's ever been.
How about New Jersey? Schiavone is in Secaucus.
I think it carries across the river. I don't think the river is much, as a barrier to corruption.
Does that mean that anybody, any executive from the construction industry in either New York or New Jersey would be unqualified for a high public position? As Donovan has sort of charged, he says he's just being tarnished by stereotypical images.
Well, I don't think it completely says that, but I think that you have to take a company and its progress and the people it deals with and how it deals with subcontractors, the types of unions it's been forced to deal with, and look at that and look at the company in that context. And I think the Schiavone construction company.
And how does Schiavone look in that context?
I don't think it looks too good. I think if you look at the dealings with Local 29, the dealings with the various other laborers locals, I think if you look at the dealings with Joe Powell Construction, the loan to him, the allegation of the $20,000 kickback, all of that, I think that raises serious questions.
Do you think Donovan should resign?
That's my personal belief. I think what he's faced with, and without any question of guilt or innocence arising, I think he's faced with a permanent investigator, because no matter what happens from now on, there's going to be a special prosecutor looking into him. As probes of the construction industry continue in New York, I think you're going to have people coming out of the woodwork as they're caught, as the corruption's exposed, willing to deal with the biggest name that they know how. Some of them may not be honest, some of them may. But it's going to take a special prosecutor to deal with every one of those allegations.
All right, well, he's going on national television on Sunday. We'll see what he has to say. I don't think he'll resign, do you?
I doubt it myself, too.
Okay, thanks, Ed, and come back when there's more news on Donovan.
Be glad to.
Okay, thanks.
Raymond Donovan has survived a 6-month special prosecutor's investigation with a clean bill of health. The investigation of Donovan, former executive vice president of Schiavone Construction Company of Secaucus, explored allegations of payoffs and ties to organized crime. Diane Doctor has more.
Special Prosecutor Leon Silverman said the Brooklyn grand jury heard from more than 150 witnesses, but the testimony failed to substantiate allegations of Donovan's ties to organized crime.
Although the organized crime charges, as well as others, were a source of great concern, and the investigation was as thorough as we could make it, there was developed insufficient credible evidence to warrant a prosecution of Secretary Donovan on any charge.
Silverman said the allegation that prompted his investigation was also unsubstantiated. That was informant Mario Monturo's charge that Donovan, as co-owner of the Schiavone Construction Company in Secaucus, witnessed a payoff from a union official at Prudenti's, a Long Island City restaurant. Silverman said one portion of Monturo's testimony was supported by other evidence, the allegations that no-show jobs existed on one of Schiavone's New York City construction projects. But the special prosecutor said there was nothing to prove Donovan knew of the no-shows. The investigation also found a violation of labor laws may have occurred in connection with a Schiavone-owned Fiddler's Elbow Country Club in Bedminster. Testimony revealed union officials were entertained there, but Silverman chose not to prosecute under Justice Department guidelines. Silverman could not turn up any violation of federal election laws as a result of Donovan's campaign efforts for Ronald Reagan, but the Federal Election Commission will investigate this further. Donovan, who has denied all charges all along, was obviously pleased by the report.
It is a relief to me and my family to see this matter settled once and for all, so that I can devote all of my time and my energies to the task which President Reagan asked me to do some 18 months ago.
Senate Labor Committee Chairman Orrin Hatch said that his investigation will continue, although it appears Donovan deserves the benefit of the doubt.
I do think that we're going to have to hold hearings with regard to the procedure and with regard to why we didn't get some of these reports when we should have had them.
Silverman, meanwhile, wouldn't say that Donovan's slate is clean, and he carefully avoided giving his private opinion of whether Donovan should continue on the job. In Manhattan, I'm Diane Doctor.
For the second time since June, U.S. Labor Secretary Raymond Donovan has been cleared of allegations that he had ties with organized crime figures. Special Prosecutor Leon Silverman today said there's, quote, insufficient credible evidence to support the allegations. Diane Doctor reports.
Special Prosecutor Leon Silverman today had little to add to what he'd announced in June. After interviewing or hearing testimony from more than 400 people, Silverman said there is no evidence of a case against Ray Donovan.
It would be fair to say that I have been unable to corroborate the allegations made against him with sufficient credible evidence.
Silverman admitted he was disturbed by the many allegations of Donovan's associations with organized crime figures, but the special prosecutor pointed out that 2 informants have since admitted their charges were lies. Most of the allegations dismissed by Silverman centered around Donovan's executive position with the Schiavone Construction Company in SECAUCUS. Schiavone subcontracted with the Joe Pell Company for work on subway projects like this in New York City. William Billy the Butcher Maselli was a principal in Joe Pell and reportedly a member of organized crime. Maselli's son Nat, also with Joe Pell, was murdered in August. The automobile involved was recovered, and this man, Salvatore Odierno, was arrested. Nat Maselli, it was learned, had cooperated with the Donovan probe. So had his father.
On the basis of the investigation to date, there appears to be no evidence of a relationship between the Maselli murder and Secretary Donovan.
Among the other allegations refuted in this latest report, that Donovan distributed $20 million in Teamsters money for the Reagan campaign effort. In exchange, a source said, Donovan, as labor secretary, would pardon 2 convicted mobsters. Silverman also dismissed the allegation that Donovan had dummy companies he used to launder money, and also false, the charge that Donovan made a $5,000 payoff to reputed organized crime figure Nicholas Paterno.
Although Silverman has officially closed his case, the FBI is continuing to look into the murder of Nat Maselli. If that FBI probe turns up any evidence linking Donovan to the murder, Silverman says he's willing to resume his duties as special prosecutor. In Manhattan, I'm Diane Doctor.
Meanwhile, in Washington, Labor Secretary Donovan expressed his anger over the long drawn-out investigation.
I am angry. Angry that I have had to endure months and months of relentless press coverage of groundless charges made by nameless accusers. Angry that my wife and children have suffered as only a family can suffer. And angry that my former business associates have been unfairly maligned. I have consistently told the American people that there is absolutely no substance to these charges, and that that is the way the final chapter will be written.
White House counselor Edwin Meese repeated that President Reagan has always had confidence in Donovan, adding that he knew of no reason why the Labor Secretary would not retain his cabinet post. Labor Secretary Raymond Donovan says he will not resign from office under pressure of allegations that he has ties to organized crime. In an afternoon conference at the Labor Department today, Secretary Donovan broke his pledge of silence, saying he was disgusted with what he called the relentless and cowardly attacks made on him and his company.
I have every intention of serving as Secretary of Labor and completing the job I was asked to do. This presumption of guilt is particularly disturbing, since it seems certain that Mr. Silverman's report will be issued in just a few days.
Donovan added that he would comment more fully after the special prosecutor issues his formal report on the matter. The report on the Secretary's alleged involvement in bid rigging, labor payoffs, and organized crime connections should be presented within a week. Today's statement by Donovan comes one day after investigators hired by the Secretary's former company, Schiavone Construction of Secaucus, revealed charges brought against an investigator for the Senate Labor Committee. The charges show that Frank Silby, who was hired by committee chairman Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah to probe the allegations against Donovan, pleaded guilty to making obscene phone calls in 1961. Silby was indicted for attempted extortion but pleaded guilty to the downgraded charges. Is this latest public disclosure a get-even ploy? No, says Schiavone attorney Theodore Geiser.
When the source of those leaks is found to be a convicted criminal employed by Senators Hatch and Kennedy, I think that, in fairness, that goes to the credibility of the information.
Isn't this the act of a desperate man?
The Secretary is far from a desperate man. It was our endeavor, and continues to be our endeavor, to show not only that the allegations are untrue, which is a matter for the grand jury and Mr. Silverman, but now that the source of this material is a convicted criminal.
Schiavone hired their own investigators about a month ago to check on the Senate's investigation, but Donovan has said that he has never been advised or consulted about the progress of the company's probe. Last Labor Committee Chairman Hatch said today that Schiavone's investigation was not proper, and committee members are now waiting for the special prosecutor's report.
Labor Secretary Raymond Donovan was arraigned in New York City today on a 137-count criminal indictment. He appeared before a judge to declare his innocence, and then before reporters to claim it was all politically motivated. Donovan took a leave of absence without pay from his position in President Reagan's cabinet last night. The charges include grand larceny and falsifying business records and grow out of business dealings of his construction company before he joined the government. Coming out of the courtroom today in the Bronx, he said this.
Today, I ask the judge for expedited action in this outrageous case. It is essential that this matter be laid to rest so that I and many other innocent people can remove ourselves from the clutches of this Inquisition. I commented yesterday, without having seen the indictment, that it was not worth the paper it was written on. Now that I've seen it, I realize that I overstated its value. Let me give you some examples. On Monday, September the 24th, I testified voluntarily before the Bronx grand jury. I arrived at 9:30 a.m. and my testimony concluded at 4 p.m. This morning, for the first time, I saw a copy of the indictment. I was shocked to learn that I was not asked any questions in the grand jury that related to the charges in the indictment. The same day I testified, the indictment was voted. And let me remind you, it's 73 pages long and 137 counts. The indictment was obviously prepared before I even testified. Now you tell me whether or not I have been afforded basic fairness and the due process of the law. I hope you, the press, consider these facts when you report your stories for the consumption of the American people. Mr. Merola may have won today's battle by the misuse of his office, but I guarantee you this, he will not win the war.
What do you think? The prosecutor in the case is the Bronx District Attorney, Mario Merola, a Democrat. He held a news conference after the arraignment, and it got heated before it was over as reporters pressed him for details.
We're saying to you that he knew about all of these illegal transactions.
But is knowledge
you people are talking about the trial. Gentlemen, there are tapes here. There's 7 months of tape. There's a lot of evidence. There are a lot of people who have to testify. You're asking about specific evidence, and I suggest to you we're going to have to wait for the trial.
Are you alleging that Mr. Donovan took part in a scheme to steal up to $8 million?
I'm saying that he, his corporation, and all of his officers
that he did take part in such a scheme.
He had his people sign these false documents, and these people were employees and officers of the corporation.
Was he an active participant? Did he take part in such a scheme?
The answer is yes.
Raymond Donovan has spent much of the past 4 years under investigation by the Congress, a special federal prosecutor, the FBI, and by local prosecutors in New York. But it wasn't until late yesterday that Donovan was actually charged with crimes. Donovan's legal problems stem from his work at the New Jersey construction firm Schiavone Company, where he was part owner and executive vice president until going to Washington in 1981. That same year, an FBI probe into union corruption in New York led to charges that Donovan had organized crime connections and had participated in payments of kickbacks to union officials, charges Donovan vehemently denied. Nevertheless, a special prosecutor, Leon Silverman, was appointed to investigate the allegations, which eventually grew to a total of 28. It took 9 months of investigation, but Donovan was eventually cleared of all charges. But rumors of Donovan's legal problems refused to die. Last month, his name surfaced again in another New York investigation into alleged fraud in a city subway construction contract. Donovan again denied any involvement and waived his immunity before testifying before a grand jury for nearly 5 hours last week. Our reporter Marie McLean talked to the Bronx DA, Mario Merola, after he brought the indictments this afternoon. Merola described how the investigation led to Donovan and the Schiavone Company.
We're charging these individuals with grand larceny, falsifying business records, and offering business records. And we're stating that they, in effect, have committed grand larceny to the tune of about $8 million.
What exactly is Mr. Donovan's involvement in this scheme?
Mr. Donovan, we're not charging him for his activities as Secretary of Labor. We're talking about a period that preceded that. We're talking about his activities in 1978, 79, 80, and up until the time that he became Secretary of Labor. We're charging him being the Executive Vice President of the Schiavone Corporation. He's a substantial stockholder therein. We're saying that he actively participated in the entire scheme and that he was involved, and he certainly received the benefits of this scheme, whereby the Transit Authority had to pay $8 million. And we're also saying that in this process, the minorities of the city of New York were defrauded to the extent that they did not receive the employment which was the intention of the act.
Mr. Donovan said earlier that this indictment was not worth the paper it was written on. How do you respond to that?
I can only respond that the case has to be tried in court. We win some and we lose some.
Some Republicans in Washington have said the charges against Mr. Donovan are politically motivated.
Well, that's a difficult question to answer for the very simple reason that the election's 5 weeks away. I can only say to you that we had the homicide of 1982. We prosecuted those two individuals. The cases went to trial in October and November of 1983. We then got information, received evidence from Ed McDonald, from the strike force. He provided information to us which caused us to investigate the Frascone murder. So naturally, when we started to investigate the Frascone murder, we backed into the Donovan. We would have loved to conclude this in the early part of this year, but we had to go to the federal court. We had to get many orders. We had to deal with this. And I say, when you talk about politics being involved, everybody seems to forget that there is a state senator involved here, Joseph Gallagher, who was a good friend of mine and who is a Democrat. We have an obligation to do what we have to do.
Well, the timing of this report, as you said, is 5 weeks before the election. Why did the indictments come down today?
Well, it came down for all the reasons that I've indicated to you, but more important, we had a statute of limitation problem. We did not come down with an indictment by October the 1st, $800,000 worth of what we call fraudulent paperwork and receipts by the Schiavone company. We could not have taken action against, and we have to go ahead and do our job, regardless of who it involves. If it involves a vice president or a president, and we just have to do our job. I think it's unfortunate.
Some people have said that the indictments against Mr. Donovan wouldn't have come down if he wasn't President Reagan's Secretary of Labor.
No, that's not quite accurate. I think that nobody's above the law. I think that in order to do your job, a prosecutor has to be firm, no matter against who it is, friend or foe. I think just the opposite is true. We had an obligation to go ahead. He owes a greater public trust to the public. He was involved. And we have set forth all of the facts to a Bronx grand jury, and they have returned these indictments.
To try to make all this clearer for us, we have Marcia Kramer, a reporter who's been covering the Donovan case for the past 2 years for the New York Daily News. Ms. Kramer, all this is a very tangled web, but in simple terms, what exactly are they alleging that Donovan did?
Well, see, I think that today's indictment leaves many questions unanswered, and specifically, the biggest question is, what exactly did Mr. Donovan do? The indictment that was handed up today, all 137 counts, lists no overt acts saying that on such and such a date the Secretary of Labor did this and so. So it's really hard to determine exactly how they're going to build their case. I think we have to wait to see what evidence the district attorney introduces at trial to see exactly what he's charging Mr. Donovan with.
What is the crime that is being alleged here? What is this $8 million and the New York Transit Authority? What's all that about?
Well, it's alleged by the prosecutors that the Schiavone Construction Company submitted phony invoices to the New York City Transit Authority for work allegedly done by the Joe Pell Construction Company, which was reported to be a duly constituted minority business enterprise.
And a subcontractor,
and
presumably.
a subcontractor to Schiavone. And the alleged illegal act were these $8 million of phony invoices. But we don't know if Raymond Donovan participated in any kind of conspiracy to have these invoices filled out. The indictment does not include a conspiracy charge. It's just a grand larceny count and numerous counts of maintaining false business records.
So they're claiming, to put it very simply, that this company, they're alleging that this company stole $8 million from the New York Transit Authority by pretending that work was done by a minority contractor that wasn't actually done.
That's true.
I see. But the link with Donovan himself is not clear to you so far.
You know, we pressed Mr. Merola very hard today during the press conference, and he kept saying that as an officer and part owner of the Schiavone Construction Company, and I quote, he profited from this skullduggery.
I see. So, but he also said, wait for the trial.
I think we all have to wait for the trial.
Yeah. And what is the reference to the homicides and the Frascone murder? What has that to do with this?
Well, you know, I'm a little troubled by that myself. Basically, the Frascone murder was ordered, allegedly, by organized crime figures who were trying to take over a construction company. I mean, that's the allegation that Mr. Merola is charging today. He claims that one of the defendants in the case, William Maselli, wanted to take over the construction company that Mr. Frascone was involved in, and so he was killed.
Is this attempting to revive the allegations that Mr. Donovan had connections with organized crime, allegations which were dismissed when they were found to have no merit before?
Well, they weren't dismissed saying that they had no merit. What the special prosecutor said was that there's no credible evidence to indict. What District Attorney Marola said today was that he took the credible evidence that the special prosecutor discovered and put it together with other what he called credible evidence from other prosecutorial sources and built what he called today a mosaic that gave him a fuller picture of the activities of the Labor Secretary.
Mm-hmm. What is the collective opinion among, and if you don't want to answer this question as a reporter, tell me, but the collective opinion in the press? I mean, a lot of you have been discussing this case for a long time, and you've been following it for a long time. Is there any merit to the allegation that this is a politically cooked-up thing before the election?
I don't know whether it's a politically cooked-up thing before the election. I mean, there is some truth to the fact that the statute of limitations expired yesterday on a major part of the case. However, I think it does have political implications here in New York City. I think that if Mario Marola succeeds in convicting the Secretary of Labor, he becomes a very viable candidate to challenge Mayor Koch next year, who's seeking re-election.
I see. And what is is your estimate compared with these other charges that have been made before and then he's been cleared? I mean, is this a serious case this time that there is?
Well, you know, when you bring a murder indictment along with another indictment charging fraud, the worry is that there's some spillover, that a jury thinks, well, if there was an alleged organized crime murder, and if they feel that there is evidence to convict the people charged in that crime, that there may be some spillover to the other case. And I think we should be pointing out that one of the people charged in the murder case is also charged along with Donovan in the other case, in the other indictment. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a problem of spilling the two across, and maybe that's a little unfair.
How close are you to Mr. Donovan in covering this? I mean, what I really want to know is this. He sounds very confident that it's a baseless charge, and that is the way he sounded in all the previous allegations that have been brought against him. Is there any difference in quality in his attitude in this one?
Well, today I think he seemed a little less confident than he has in the past. He made quite a big deal in court and outside of court of the fact that when he went into the grand jury last week and waived immunity, that he wasn't asked any questions pertaining to the charges that were contained in today's indictment. He said that was unfair, and his lawyer said that he was going to seek dismissal of the case based on those grounds.
Mm-hmm. Well, Marcia Kramer, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Jim?
President Reagan, the first president ever to have a cabinet member indicted, declined to charge it was all politics, but campaigning in Texas, Mr. Reagan did say today a lynch atmosphere has followed his administration's officials from the beginning, and he said he considered Donovan innocent until proven guilty. No one except President Reagan knows exactly why he let Donovan take a temporary leave rather than a permanent one, but few are in a better position to speculate about it than David Gergen. He was the White House Director of Communications until last December. He is now at the American Enterprise Institute and frequently here as a political analyst. David, why would Mr. Reagan want to keep an indicted cabinet official around 5 weeks before an election?
Well, Jim, I have to say, I don't know exactly,
sure.
and I think the administration wisely is not revealing all of the conversations that have occurred about this, but it's in Reagan's nature to come to the defense of someone who has served him, and in his view, in Reagan's view, Raymond Donovan has served him well and served the country well. And I think that much is revealed by Reagan's comments today. He feels that frequently we go through this process in public life where someone is held up essentially for a hanging. We prepare for the day, then we almost try to lynch them before they have an opportunity to have their day in court. Now, Raymond Donovan did go through, of course, a long process, as the show earlier explained, with a special counsel taking a look at him, and he essentially cleared him. And Mr. Donovan felt vindicated, and Mr. Reagan felt, you know, he's had a hard look. And now this charge comes up, and I'm sure Reagan feels, I don't want to join the lynch mob. I want to stand back and take a look at this and let the court act, do its will.
Well, your old boss at the White House, your indirect, obviously you worked for the president, but one of your bosses was Jim Baker, the chief of staff, and it's been widely reported and never denied that Jim Baker has wanted Donovan to step aside gracefully for years now, almost since shortly after he came in as Secretary of Labor. What's the story there?
Well, I don't think I ought to speak for Jim, but I can say this. There were some people in the administration, in the White House and elsewhere, who felt that after the special counsel had taken a look at this and essentially had cleared Ray, that was the appropriate time for Ray then to move along, because he had his good name back and you could start with a fresh slate there. That was not the president's view.
All right, who inside the administration, in the White House, is the big Donovan protector, if that's the word, other than the president?
I think you've got to start with the president.
Is that right?
It's critical to understand in this administration that when it comes to matters of personnel, the president is the one who stands by his people. Now, there are some of the administration in those situations who agonize over it. There are others who think it's one of his great strengths. Usually it has served him extremely well because people in the administration know they can count on him.
Yeah. But the president said, well, as Robin, we're going to go into more detail in a moment, but the suggestion from Walter Mondale and others today, okay, he's innocent until proven guilty, but my goodness, here we have a cabinet official under indictment, in fact, for 3 years now, has been more or less fooling with criminal charges of one case or the other. I mean, is there not a difference between this and just defending somebody who's got a problem?
Clearly, when a sitting cabinet officer is indicted, the first in history, that's a serious matter and should be taken seriously. But I think that the president is urging a certain amount of caution in these situations. I think his view is, look, we've been through these situations with other people. After all, Mr. Mondale just went through a long tangle about his own vice presidential candidate, and she was thoroughly looked at. Some people say very thoroughly, some people say not thoroughly enough, but in any event, we all know that what she went through, and she, in the minds of many people, has cleared herself. Ed Meese went through a similar situation. People thought, well, shouldn't Ed Meese, leave the White House? Well, Mr. Reagan stood by him. We had a special counsel look at him. He then concluded in the 365-page report there is no improper wrongdoing here.
Yes, but David, just looking specifically now at Mr. Reagan's decisions, etc. There was never any criminal indictment against Ann Burford. She's gone. There was never a criminal indictment against Jim Watt. He's gone. There was never any criminal indictment against Richard Allen. He's gone. Why is Raymond Donovan different than those three?
That's an interesting question, and I'm not sure I know the answer to that. Each one of these cases takes on its own dynamic, and frequently the person who's there feels, whether it be someone like a Jim Watt, it's in the president's best interest. I think Jim, when he came in, understood that in the long term he was going to be the lightning rod and take a lot of heat and eventually not, serve out the full 4 years. Raymond Donovan wants to fight for his name, and I think the president feels under the circumstances he should stand by him. Now, you can argue whether that's right or wrong. I think it reveals something about Ronald Reagan and his loyalty to his people and his feeling that whatever the heat, even 5 weeks before an election, I'll stand by someone.
Is it pretty much Donovan's decision then? If Donovan were to come to the president and say, hey, I think I need to go, the president would say, okay, shove, or
well,
what?
He would say, I am absolutely certain if Raymond Donovan came to him and said, I think under the circumstance it would be better if I severed all the ties, that the president would say, sadly, I think you're probably right. But my sense of this, the dynamics of this situation was that Raymond Donovan continues to feel, as your interview showed, that he has been wrongly done by. And I think that Marcia Kramer interview you just had, which I was very illuminating, suggested, yes, this is serious, but yes, let's wait and see the trial to determine the wrong or right doing. There's one other irony on this I might just briefly point out. There are a lot of people who criticize the whole idea of having a special prosecutor or a special counsel to look at these things. We've seen in 2 cases now, Ed Meese, when a special counsel really helped to clear the air. And in this situation, Raymond Donovan can now point back to a special counsel and say, he looked at this. So these special counsels do serve a good purpose.
David Gergen, thank you.
Thank you.
Robin?
Walter Mondale also said he presumed Donovan innocent, but called on President Reagan to make his own independent determination of whether there was a reasonable basis for the charges. Mondale was speaking at a news conference before leaving Washington on a campaign swing.
The trial of Mr. Donovan's guilt can only be conducted according to due process. That's a court with a jury, under all the rules of evidence and all the rest. I would not substitute for that at all. But the president has a different responsibility, and that is to administer the laws of this land effectively and in a way that builds public trust and confidence in the integrity of that process. That imposes upon the president a different responsibility, not related to criminal law, to determine whether he believes there's sufficient credibility to these serious charges that the Secretary ought to be removed.
Mondale added, after all, the public has a right to determine that its cabinet officers are entitled to public trust. On Capitol Hill, there were calls for Donovan's resignation and Republican suspicion that the indictment was political.
This morning, I asked the President to ask the Secretary of Labor to resign. The reason for the regret is that any time someone at this high level of government is involved in a grand jury indictment, I think it's time to step aside and permit this very important government department to function. And I just believe that the right thing to do is to step aside, not leave this department leaderless, and to get on with the business of the Department of Labor.
You should get rid of him and move on. He has other things to worry about, other things to discuss. There's a different standard, a better standard that must be maintained by this administration. There is a tendency on the part of this administration to have a moral blind spot when it comes to the standards set by their country club cronies, and a different standard when it comes to those that are on food stamps or on anything else.
I'm just pulling for Ray Donovan. I think that man has had enough pain here, and I think the people in this country ought to recognize that. And I think we ought to all look at the what happened up there for the potential of what it probably is, and that is election year politics. But if it isn't, then I don't see where Ray Donovan or anybody else should not have to face whatever the problems are. And Ray is willing to do that, says that he'll be proven innocent, and I believe that.